Today's talk is titled Awakenings, to be delivered by Reverend Ken Reed Brown. Reverend Brown retired about a year ago after serving for 35 years as the Unitarian Universalist minister of the First Parish in Hingham, Massachusetts, the Old Ship Church. Ken received his Master of Divinity degree at the Starr King School for the Ministry at Berkeley, California, and received his BA in philosophy at Haverford College. Ken still lives in Hingham with his wife, Susan. They have 3 grown married children and 6 grandchildren, aged 8 months to 8 years. In retirement, Ken serves on an interfaith committee at the Hingham Glastonbury Abbey, where he organizes an annual speaker series, Listening to Other Voices. And he has recently joined the communications team at Elders Climate Action. He and Susan spend as much time with their grandchildren as possible, and Ken seeks every opportunity to play the banjo, guitar, or mandolin, or just singing to the grandkids. So I will turn the podium over to Ken remotely.
Great, thank you, Joel. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Randy, for the beautiful slides. And it's just good. It's good to be here with you again. I sort of lost track. I think the first time I was invited was back in 2020 by our dear old friend Marianne, who we knew as Sunny. And I think every year since, so it's 4th or 5th time with you. And it's great to be with you again, even remotely. It'd be great to be there in person. It'd be a bigger carbon footprint than I'd like to make, but it would be good to be there with you. I feel like I'm with you in spirit. Anyway, thank you for your hospitality, for the technological wizardry, and so on. Good to be here. A quick note about Pete Seeger's song, Quite Early Morning. I've been curious as to when he wrote it. I knew it wasn't a recent composition, so I looked this up in his biography. He wrote it in 1969. And as most of you may be old enough to remember, 1968 had not been a good year for our nation, and certainly not for the causes that Pete had been involved with, the peace movement and civil rights and so on. And yet he wrote this song. And if he could write with this sense of hope or optimism, then we ought to take a lesson. So, awakenings. Have you ever had the experience of having been ill or injured, and then on the first day when you felt like a normal, quote unquote, human being, you discover that you have a fresh appreciation for, well, just about everything, a sort of awakening or reawakening to life? And I'll bet many, if not most of you, have had that experience. Here's a recollection of my own from something like 40 years ago when I was at Starr King School for the Ministry, then in Berkeley. They're now in Oakland. As an Easterner born and bred, I did not know what poison oak looked like. I'll bet most of you do. Well, on a long run one morning, it turned out I spent a lot of time running through fields of poison oak and not realizing it, but I got it bad. I will spare you a description of my condition, only to say I was miserable, finally needing the help of prednisone to get better, to heal. Well, I still vividly remember a moment on the first day that I was feeling well enough and presentable enough to be outside, and went from our apartment in Oakland over to Berkeley. And I remember so clearly walking along LeConte Avenue where the school was. And it was one of those places, a lot of you are familiar with San Francisco, I'm sure, where you just had this splendid view of San Francisco Bay from the Berkeley side on this beautiful blue sky, February, bright, sunny morning. And I don't have the words to describe the feeling other than to say that I felt profoundly awake to and grateful for the gift, the beauty of life and the gift of life. A reawakening, just, oh, I'm alive and I'm here and it's great. Now here's a very different story of awakening, at least so it seems. 10 years ago, this past spring, I ran the Boston Marathon, as I had done before and have done a few times since. 2013, 10 years ago. That was the year of the Boston Marathon bombing, as a lot of you will remember. Marathon Day, that day, dawned chilly. So instead of the warm weather t-shirt that I would often wear, a mesh lightweight shirt, I found a somewhat heavier t-shirt, one that would be familiar to you, I expect. A bright orange yellow color. And back then, before we had changed the slogan, it said, "Standing on the side of love." And love was in great big letters. So as I ran along that morning, spectators lining the street took my cue from the shirt. As they do, some runners actually put their name on their shirt so they can say, "Go Ken," or "Go Sharon," or whomever it might be. But all they saw was this standing on the side of love with love in big letters. So as I ran along, often I would get those two words enthusiastically, "Go love." And I thought, well, this is great. Yes, go love. We need more love. So I love that cheer, of course. And in that spirit of love, I was running that day, as many who run the marathon do, not only for myself, sense of achievement and fun, but for my mother, whose favorite colors, not incidentally, happened to be orange and yellow, those colors of the sun. But I was running also to raise funds. My mom had just passed, and I was raising money for the Massachusetts, New Hampshire chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Go love. Go love. Well, as we learned later on that afternoon, in an instant, love became as important as ever it can be on that day, which otherwise had been a beautiful, perfect spring day of joy and celebration. For then we, collectively, all of us who were there, people watching from afar, saw love awakened in the midst of horrible tragedy, as we often do in the midst of tragedy, whether it was on 9/11 or after the Maui wildfires or the floods in Libya, and on and on. We often see this outpouring of love. That day in 2013, we saw love in the hands of first responders and their expertise. We saw love in the legs of bystanders who ran towards the people who were suffering instead of away from. And love, of course, in the skilled hands of medical personnel. We saw and heard love in the frantic texts and emails and calls from family and friends, mine included, who just wanted to know if their dear ones were okay, as I was, having crossed the finish line earlier. All in all, yes, indeed, go love. So two seemingly quite different varieties of awakening. Reawakening to the beauty and gift of life after illness, and reawakening to love in the midst of tragedy and suffering. But it seems to me that these two examples are actually quite closely related. Maybe you've drawn the connection yourself already. Both sorts of awakenings take us out of ourselves, out of our small selves, our constricted and illusory identity center, as we might call it. This illusion that we are separate from the rest of creation, separate from one another, that we're just observers inside this sack of bones of everything out there. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. For yes, both of these awakenings, different in so many ways, but both of them have to do with being lifted out of that illusion of separateness, instead awakened to fuller presence for the creation and for each other. This begins, it seems to me, to get at what the Buddha meant when he said he was awake. I was amused by the laughter that quote brought in the congregation, who knew that the Buddha was doing stand-up. But I expect he took his interlocutors by surprise too. What does he mean, awake? Well, it is the name, the meaning of, as you may know, of the word or the title Buddha. It simply means awake or awakened one. Awake to how things truly are, rather than how we often think they are or wish they were. So how are things? Well, as we all know, we heard it this morning again in the sharing of joys and concerns, sorrows. Life is a blend of joy and sorrow, suffering coexisting, the same world, the same universe, love coexisting, suffering coexisting with happiness. The suffering deepened by grasping after what cannot be grasped, as Buddha's teacher has it, but it's a universal idea, grasping after what cannot be grasped because it's always changing, and not accepting change and impermanence as the rule of life brings suffering. By believing ourselves to be separate from the rest of reality and from each other brings suffering. So awakening to how things truly are, including the realities of suffering, also opens us to beauty and opens us to love, opens us to one another, taking us out of our small selves. And this is why we're here, isn't it? Seems to me, here on the planet, in the universe, here in our congregations, such as yours, communities of faith of all kinds, here to, as we might put it, increase the odds on such awakenings or reawakenings, including increasing the odds that the love in which we swim, which we live and move and have our being, but so often fail to notice in our busyness and worries and so on. Increasing the odds that love will become awakened or reawakened evermore, moving from hearts to kind words to helping hands, healing hands, more and more often, and not only in the midst of tragedy or disaster. After all, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we could be awake to love and manifest love more of the time, maybe all of the time? It is, admittedly, not easy to see how the world actually is and all of its incessant and eternal changes. Even though we know the leaves on the trees behind me are soon going to turn, we know that, but there are so many changes that we resist, our own getting older, the losses in our lives, and so on. So it's all too easy to deceive ourselves into thinking that how the world is in a given moment, right in front of us, is how it will always be. We do this all the time, even though it's not true. And in our brains, we know it's not true, but we do it all the time, holding maybe a little too tight to what is, but only seems to be. For example, on my otherwise fine run through the woods 40 years ago, far from my mind was the possibility that I would soon spend several days in Poison Oak misery. Far more tragically, 10 years ago was that Marathon Monday. Runners ran, spectators cheered, gathered, all as everyone always does on Patriots' Day, rain or shine. It happened to be a beautiful day, that one. We enjoyed, we celebrated on this beautiful spring day as if it would go on forever, or at least for the rest of that day. Easy to understand that expectation, right? But how the world really was on that day also included those two horribly misguided souls planning their attack on those cheering, happy faces and exhausted, happy runners. Well, upon reflection, it seems to me it's worth remembering that this coexistence of joy and sorrow, as I said earlier, is how the world is every day. And somewhere we have this lovely moment together now, and other places we know it's not so lovely in a whole variety of ways, but other places it's just as lovely, just as beautiful. Both and awake to it all, open eyes. That's the deeper awakening. To look at it from the other direction, the world includes not only all too apparent suffering and terror and tragedy that we see in the news, and sometimes in our own lives, but also joy and celebration and happiness and love. Not, oh, the world is actually filled with suffering, isn't it terrible? It's filled with both. And sometimes the tragedy, as you heard in my story, and as we see over and again, the tragedy unlocks the joy and love. The bombs exploded and love exploded immediately thereafter, reawakening to love, which is always there and ready to flower. So here then, as I might put it, is the heart of my message today. Even if it takes a lifetime of learning and relearning, learning again, and practice and growing, it doesn't and shouldn't have to take recovery from illness or some terrible tragedy to reawaken us to the gift and beauty of life. And it shouldn't take this sudden disaster to reawaken us to love. All in this world as it actually is, sorrow and joy intertwine. Yes, in this world where the Buddhist First Noble Truth, which names the reality of suffering, Beauty and love are also true, as I've been saying. Love, not just clinging to one another, as if you could hold off forever the continual tide of change. No, a better love than that, actually, paradoxically more enduring love, love held lightly and deeply at the same time. And this is a love we can choose every day. Not only a feeling, love is a wonderful feeling, but it's not only that we need to wait for, hope for, but a way of living we can choose and practice. It's a spiritual practice, a life practice every day in the midst of, though never really, apparently trivial interactions, offering the kind word and helping hand, certainly to our dear ones, to friends, to acquaintances, to checkout person in the store. It's not so hard. I mean, sometimes it feels hard on our bad days, but we can do it. Another way of putting all this, awakening to who we truly are and how the world actually is to awaken to a kind of right-sized sense of ourselves, part of this web of life. Our role, everyone, each one of us, to bless the web and bless one another with whatever gifts are ours to give, to nourish and nurture the beautiful natural world which surrounds us, to nourish and nurture the love in our hearts, love, the connecting fibers in the fabric of the universe, we might say. We need not wait for some outer circumstance to reawaken this love. We can create the conditions for awakening with various practices. More on that in a moment. In any case, this right-sized experience of who we are seems to me, to be fully woke, to use that used and abused word these days. Our abiding concern for racism, injustices of all kinds, the climate crisis, suffering of all kinds. Not just choosing this or that correct opinion on these issues, but rather rooted in being deeply awake to the gifts of life, rooted in experiencing ourselves, as I've been saying, as woven into the warp and woof of the web, as Dr. King beautifully put it, this network of mutuality, single garment of destiny, love. A couple of poets, as I draw to a conclusion. Poet Gary Snyder suggests a relationship between the word Buddha and the word bud. I hope you all know Gary Snyder. He's a California guy, wonderful poet. A relationship between Buddha and the word bud. So awakening as a flower, a daffodil, for example, awakens, buds. And following this, another poet, Denise Levertov, wrote, it's in our hymn book, these words, "We have only begun to love the earth. We've only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. There's too much broken that must be mended. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud." So in this spirit, we can all be invited to some daily practice, running, walking, meditation, prayer, Tai Chi, yoga. Could be reading a poem every morning. Haiku is good for this, bringing us into the present moment. In any case, anything that helps us to bud, to awaken a bit more, and to reawaken, especially in tumultuous or troubled times, to awaken to beauty, to love, to who we are, how the world is, including as a spiritual practice, the one we're all engaged in right this minute, coming to church or congregation, community of faith, by whatever name, simply coming together, including online here, where we see each other, mirrors and is part of this reality that we are together, we're not separate. And every time we walk into our place of meeting or click onto the Zoom screens, we see that and can experience it, that we're not separate, we're together. And in our form of worship, we experience this particularly when joys and concerns and sorrows are shared, linking us so deeply. Or our practice every day could simply to try to heed Thoreau's admonishment to learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake by an infinite expectation of the dawn. In our more troubled moments, remembering, as we heard earlier with Pete Seeger, that it's darkest before the dawn, and that the time may well be now, quite early morning. Notice that word now, not future, but now, doing what we each can, where we are, with what we got, to help and heal, to keep on, as Pete said, to keep on while we live. So may it be, and blessed be. Thank you again for being together and welcoming me. Blessings.